Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the 2017 Iowa City Book Festival, presented by the Iowa City UNESCO City of Literature. We would like to thank the sponsors who made this event possible: the City of Iowa City, the University of Iowa, the Iowa Arts Council, the Iowa City Coralville Convention and Visitors Bureau, Iowa Public Radio, and the Tuesday Agency. Between events, be sure to visit the book fair at Merge. That's next to the public library. There's complimentary coffee, and you can visit with authors and booksellers. The vast majority of these book festival events are offered without charge, but they're not free. Your tax-deductible donation gives us the ability to offer programs like this festival. Please consider supporting the City of Literature by texting the word book to 319-774-7669 and follow the link. Today, as part of the panel discussion, Writing is Recovery, we will hear from Xavier Villanova, Antoinette Tidjani Alou, Whitney Terrell, Melissa Fraterrigo, and Mike Lankford, who will discuss how one writes through profound experiences of loss and pain, and whether writing ultimately releases this trauma. Xavier Villanova is a playwright, screenwriter, stage director, actor, and translator from Mexico. He has had his work staged in Mexico, the US, and Venezuela. In 2011, the Lark Play Development Center in New York workshopped his Acheron, The River of Tragedy. Ocean Blues, co-written by him and based on his eponymous play, is on Netflix. Antoinette Tidjani Alou is a fiction writer, poet, translator, and scholar from Niger. She teaches literature and directs the program of performing arts at Abdou Momani University in Miami. Whitney Terrell's novel, The Good Lieutenant, was selected as a Best Book of 2016 by The Washington Post, The Boston Globe, and Refinery 29. It was longlisted for the Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction. He's also the author of The Huntsman, a New York Times notable book in 2001, and The King of Kings County, which was selected as Best Book of 2005 by the Christian Science Monitor. He is currently an assistant professor of English at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, where he teaches creative writing. Melissa Fraterrigo is the author of the novel Glory Days from the University of Nebraska Press and the short story collection The Longest Pregnancy. Her fiction and nonfiction has appeared in more than 40 literary journals and anthologies, from Shenandoah and the Massachusetts Review to Story South and Notre Dame Review. She teaches classes on the art and craft of writing at the Lafayette Writer Studio in Lafayette, Indiana. Mike Lankford is a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop and the author of Life in Double Time, Confessions of an American Drummer, a memoir about his years as a white drummer in a black R&B band. The book was an Amazon editor's pick and was selected by 8 major newspapers, including the Chicago Tribune and the Austin Chronicle, as the best music book of the year. His new book is Becoming Leonardo, an unconventional biography of Leonardo da Vinci. Please help me welcome our panelists.
Okay, thank you for the introductions. Thank you, the 5 of you, for being here today. I am going to help moderate this panel. My name is Kate DeSherry, and I just want to start by giving each one of you a chance to briefly address the general topic today. Isn't most writing, or maybe is writing, fundamentally grounded in pain, trauma, and loss? And how do you write through such a profound experience? So if you could each just give us sort of your brief general perspective on that, and then we'll have some conversation after that. Antoinette?
Thank you, and thank you all for being here. I don't usually write anything when I have a presentation. Well, I don't usually read anything, but I will make an exception today and talk from my framework ideas before breakfast this morning on the topic of writing as recovery and writing through trauma. One may read on the Psychology Today website, I quote, psychological trauma may set in after a distressing or life-threatening event. Sufferers may develop extreme anxiety or PTSD, or they may have ongoing problems with relationships and self-esteem, but many overcome trauma, offering inspiration to others who have had life-altering negative experiences, end of quote. I hope that will be the case of most of us writers who write out of the trauma of our lives. Hurt, pain one that lives in the mind, which excoriates or undermines the person, the personality, often secretly, subterraneously, in silence. That is my definition of trauma. Inner trauma is nothing to boast about, but after a while, if ever it once did, it fails to spur sympathy. Societies have devised many ways of dealing with trauma. These may be subsumed under the word catharsis, meaning spiritual, moral purgation, cleansing, renewal, liberation from anxiety and stress, from trauma. The word is Greek, dated back to its written occurrences in the Poetics of Aristotle 350 years before the Common Era. But the concept and treatment, catharsis, are considerably older. Aristotle felt that drama, the tragic drama was the best suited to deal with and expurgate the passions that make our lives so challenging. However, in 2154 BC, a very long time before Aristotle, in the age of the ancient Egyptian Middle Kingdom, when the sphinxes still sniffed the damp air of the Nile Valley with their distinctively sub-Saharan African noses, the fundamental trauma of mortality in a conscious being led to the elaboration of a complex afterlife and text of pleading with the gatekeepers of the underworld. These are summed up in the book of Coming Forth by Day, which has come down to us as the Egyptian Book of the Dead. I think that title is rather inapt, and I rather prefer the other title, the Book of Coming Forth by Day, which is a lot more closer to the spirit of this ancient text. I don't think that ancient Greece or ancient Egypt are the only ones to deal with those issues. Closer to us in 20th century Niger, there has been dances of possession that try to expel and control the white gods of fire, which France unleashed on the Sahel as of 1898, which is pretty close to us. But what about us writers, most of us? What about me? What are my traumas? How do I write them? Here's a short list. The history of the Middle Passage and that of the Caribbean Plantation Society that violently linked Africa, Europe, and the Americas in a bed of unpaid sweat, blood, unnaming, dehumanizing, and amnesia. It is a heavy history. I engage in it in my memo fiction, autofiction, One Life is Not Enough, which is my project here at the Fall Residency. The smaller history of my family is also traumatic to me in many ways. I am thinking of my family life, which was made very miserable in the later part of my infancy by my beloved violent father, who was a weekend alcoholic, a man of superior intelligence, knowledge, eloquence, and wit, but also a very unhappy soul who ruined any hopes that we might have had of a happy family life, but who, on the other hand, bequeathed me with many gifts, not least among them the love of books and thinking. There's also the harder to admit negative aspects of the legacy of my mother, who is my everlasting heroine, but whom I have had to face and understand not as a goddess, but as a woman, albeit a powerful woman, if a quiet one. It is thanks to my mother that I was able to actually go to school and make use of the homebred love of books and thinking, which might not have gone very far had it only been my father. The last trauma that I'd like to mention here is the death of my beautiful daughter, Karima, who died at age 16 in 2009. And this is something that I engage with in this autofiction in French, On m'appelle Nina. Living in my country of second nationality, finally, is a very traumatic experience. Niger is very different from my first homeland, Jamaica, and I find this place to be constraining and challenging in many ways, but I have still decided to stay, persevere, build, challenge, answer back, and grow in love, but also in truth regarding this space. In respect of this, what does my writing do for me and for others? A final short list. It frightens me. Can I really go there? It names for me the history in the blood, the silence history, which I never learned in school. It's a damp day, paper doesn't like it. Writing links to me the larger story of history to the smaller story of family. It revives the pain, it faces the pain, it writes the pain till light comes, till it takes wings, keens, then sings. It links me to other people's stories. Many people have said to me, I am Nina, or you are not Nina, this story goes beyond you. It addresses a society in which I live, which is also my home, and which seeks security in rules, which lives in denial, shrouds in silence, and by illustrating that what is lived or imagined can be spoken, can be written. It makes people go silent on me, people I love. It pushes back the borders of possibility for me and for others at home, the women, the young people especially, I believe. Thank you.
Well, I suppose my bona fides for being on a panel about trauma is that I've written a memoir about my aunt in Dallas, who in 1999 called me. I was living up here and wanted me to come down. She was going to turn 90 years old, and she had been the doctor of last resort in North Texas for over 50 years. She was a homeopath, a seer, a shaman, a healer. She diagnosed with vision, healed with touch. She had a gigantic following down there, thousands of people, and she was a thoroughly remarkable, charismatic person. She was also just crazy as a bat, but that's beside the point. She talked me into to relocating in Dallas, and over the next year, I discovered why there was no one else in her life with a blood connection. All of her associates were of fairly recent vintage. She went through people, in other words. And what happened during that time there was that she got me into the house, moved me into the house, threw me out, got me back in, threw me out. It went on, it's sort of like living with Donald Trump, to tell you the truth. But eventually, she threw me out for, I think, the 6th time, and I thought, you know what, we're going to let this set. I'm going to take 6 weeks. She wants me to stay gone until Christmas. I'll stay gone a month, 6 weeks, and then we can, start fresh again. While I was out of the house, she managed to get a wound on her leg, because she knows more than a doctor could ever tell her about wounds. She attempted to heal it with this African weed, which she had a supply for called, doesn't matter what it's called, Smell Beautiful, and she put it on there over and over. She'd been selling this stuff for half a century as the ultimate cure, and now she's trying it herself, and what happened was she got an infection. I'm not around. The people around her are all yaysayers, so she demanded her own space, she had her own space, and it turned into gangrene. Eventually, there was a long period where she was just in, there was a bubbling mess of chaos over there, and I was out of town. So when I get back, what I discovered was that she's near death's door and has told everyone connected, don't tell Mike. Do not tell Mike. So I'm still isolated, even though I'm getting this information, and she's blaming me for all of her misery. Then she puts a curse on me. This is a powerful thing in Dallas. And she not only put a curse on me, but she cursed the book that she knew that I was starting to write. And it actually worked. I mean, I've still not got a publisher for that thing. That's the most painful thing most people have ever read. The last person to read it, other than my publisher, said she cried for 2 days and was depressed for a week. Now, here's the point. I reworked that thing over and over for 10 years. I'm here to tell you, you can do the opposite of trauma therapy by writing about it. You can throw a hand grenade into your life, it will blow you to pieces. What happened eventually after multiple drafts is that my aunt had turned into a regular Lazarus. She died, was resurrected, and died again 12 times. I was, there for the whole thing. So the wound that was about this big got this big. Finally, I decided I'm gonna do something impossible. I'll write about Leonardo da Vinci. It was a lot easier. So as a consequence, I'm just here as sort of a hand grenade in polite society to remind you that not everything works out.
So Xavier Villanova, as the paper says, and I'm a playwright, and to me, playwriting, like writing for the stage, has always had a lot to do with like opening up the wound, and as Hemingway used to say, bleed on the typewriter, and then so that an actor, a sentient being, can take those words and actually feel something before he even tries to convey or present or represent. It has to like actually hurt him or open him in order that for he to do the same for the audience. So I have lots of stories for each play that I've written. Where did they came from? But I wanted to share with you one of these stories that actually was very traumatic and led to a very important play in my career. So I will open, this is just a short story, the story that happened before I wrote the play. It won't take long. I will open with two quotes. One is from Sebald, and it says, "As I look back, I fear it marked the beginning of a fissure that has since riven my life," end quote. And another quote that it's from a poet, and it's from Rudy Francisco. It says, "You want to know how I got these scars? Well, fine, I tell you. I swallowed my pride, and it clawed its way out of my mouth," end quote. So here comes the story. At 21, I had a psychotic breakdown. Half my face crying, half smiling. Tears leaking from my welled-up left eye, and the corner of my mouth slightly slanted towards my right cheek to signal well-being. The acting school psychologist asked with her face buried in notes, "What's wrong, kid? I've only got 5 minutes before my next appointment." "I think I raped my girlfriend 2 days ago." She looked at me intently and took her cell phone out, and I cleared my schedule. "Sit," she said. "What do you mean you think, and what do you mean raped?" Livid like a vampire, I chuckled while telling the dire tale about that night. The doctor listened with heed, and at the end she requested soothingly, "Repeat after me. I am not a rapist." I laughed nervously. "Didn't you just hear my story?" To which she directly instructed, "Repeat after me. I did not rape her." I said it, but partially believed it, since half my brain frowned upon me as a monster, and half thought I couldn't possibly do such a thing. I was raised to respect women and never to even consider the idea of harming them. And so I repeated, dear friends. I repeated after her 20 times before I got back my complexion. "You're having a psychotic breakdown," she stated. "This person made you prey and predator." The first phrase this woman, who we will call Eliza to protect her identity, had whispered at me at a party was, "I am going to destroy you." I shared this with the doctor, and she questioned, "Didn't that raise any flags?" "No, it actually sounded kind of sexy," I replied. The second thing Eliza confided in me was her current engagement to a Syrian man who she later discovered was a gangster that wanted to bring her to his country, but before he arranged everything, she had to stay in Mexico, policed by his best friend, also a gangster, that if needed was instructed to kill her or any nearing suitor for betrayal. Baffled as she was, my therapist tried to stay professional. "And that didn't chase you away?" "No, I wanted to save her." The third thing this femme fatale trusted me with was that she had been raped by 2 guys when she was 13, and again by 1 at 15, but she still had the hopes of finding the prince in shining armor to defend her honor. And the therapist had to remark, and you thought you were that quixotic Xavier. Yes, I confirmed. The fourth ball Eliza threw my way after 1 week of knowing her was, do you want to come to my house and fuck me in my room while my sister plays backing her cello and my mother cooks? I thought she was joking, but that's exactly what took place. We went to her house. Her sister greeted me in a very flirtatious manner, and while using a loud voice for everyone to hear, she declared that she'd be more than glad to play while me and baby sister had sex. Oh, and their mother was indeed at the kitchen preparing stew for when we were done. Very liberal, my psychologist almost unwillingly said. Yes. The next morning, over coffee, her sister joked about how she couldn't sleep because of Eliza's moans, but found a solution in masturbating herself to sleep. And well, that isn't the end of it. The next day, my paradigm breaker took me out on a date to Starbucks, where she discovered an elegant man who'd be perfect for her mother, and talked him into coming with us in the car back to her house to be introduced. And the following night, that which fractured my reason occurred. We were in bed, and she demanded me to hit her hard, to call her a whore and fuck her. I'd barely uttered I wasn't into that when she teasingly pushed me and said, aren't you man enough? Don't you want me? Come on, make me your whore. After she laughed at me several times and insisted for the third time, I decided that the most I would do was to have sex with her, stroking her arms forcefully and telling her that yes, she was mine. Yes, she was my whore. Not more than 10 minutes later, she stopped the moaning and started to cry. She eased herself out and ran towards the corner, holding a blanket around, shaking, staring at me with hatred, and saying those words. You raped me. I didn't want to continue, but you kept going. You said you were going to save me, but you're just like the rest. You destroyed my life. You raped me. Frightened, I approached her, but she dodged me as if I were a threat and whispered again, don't you dare touch me. You raped me. I loved you. Why? No answer, brief silence. I fell on my knees in a state of shock. A deafening, high-pitched sound hit my ears. I became dizzy. She neared me and kept repeating, I loved you. You were my prince. I forgive you. You raped me. At the end, the doctor requested soothingly, repeat after me. I am not a rapist. I laughed nervously. Didn't you just hear my story? To which she directly instructed, repeat after me. I did not rape her. I said it, but I partially believed it, since half my brain frowned upon me as a monster, and half thought I couldn't possibly do such a thing. When the session ended, the woman who restored my mental health gave me one last advice. You need to make jokes about this, as much as you can. This is the only way your brain will understand that you are not her aggressor. This way, you'll unburden yourself. You need to take the weight out of your memories from that night, or you will never recover from this experience. Jokes, I responded, regaining my sense of humor. I might not be a rapist, but I'm sure I'm a playwright. And so, I wrote Para Elisa, or For Elise, a play about that night, a play that lasted 3 years on stage, reaching 107 representations, and a tour throughout 7 states in Mexico. A play that deeply unsettled its audience, and in the process, a play that saved my life.
I certainly think that there's a bias out there when we consider writing as recovery. We tend to think that art transcends the artist, and yet, as Antoinette and Mike and Javier have noted, each of us have our own stories that we bring to our work. My current novel, Glory Days, tongue-in-cheek, came out of some very dark moments in my own life. I actually had stopped writing as a fiction writer. That's always been my identity. It's my way of walking through life. And in 2010, somebody very dear to me was diagnosed with cancer. And I was unable to sleep, and I was unable to read elements of prose, and I wasn't able to eat. But one thing I was suddenly able to do is read poetry. And I found myself really drawn to the conciseness that a poem is, and the way that it condenses words, and the way that an image could have a certain power to it. And I actually started keeping an image journal at that time, and I found a certain sense of comfort in the images that I was able to note through the poems that I read. And as I seemed to learn something new about writing, about imagery, that ended up affecting my writing as well. I used to, even though I wasn't able to do much writing at this time, I would routinely go to a library where I'd maybe journal or do some reading again. And one day I happened upon a parking attendant that used to greet me, and I hadn't seen him for a couple days, and happened to note him at the library this one day, and I said, asked him how he was doing, and he said, well, I've been south. I was burying my sister and my mother. And he just kind of shook his head and walked off. And I don't know if it was kind of the look on his face or his posture or the way he walked off, but suddenly I heard a line. Gardener hears dogs scrambling up the trees after a squirrel or a neighbor's cat, he tells himself, eager to be calmed. And that became the first line to a chapter in my novel called Teensy's Daughter. So just as the experience of my own grief changed my writing, or the way that I was approaching my writing, it affected the structure of the way that I started to write. This Glory Days is a novel in stories, so I became really interested in the spaces that exist around words, and the questions that can be raised, rather than simply the set linear line of a regular novel. So my own experience started to generate further questions, and then it also affected the characters that I ended up writing about as well.
Hi. So you wonder, oh yeah, we should applaud. You kind of wonder when you get put on you find out, oh, I'm on the panel Writing is Recovery. I'm like, oh, what made you think that I belonged on that panel? And I was trying to figure that out. I mean, there are different things that cause trauma for different people. For instance, you had somebody who close to you had cancer. I just found out that I have cancer, right? That doesn't frighten me. That's not a traumatic thing. It's a skin cancer, so I'm not going to die from it. But I do have some neat scars. But the thing that frightened me, or that was traumatic in my life, was being a war reporter in Iraq. And I was there as a reporter in 2006 and 2010. And so I think people, Iraq, particularly in 2006, is a very, very bad time for the war. And I had gone there to report and write. I wrote for the Washington Post and for Slate and did some stories for NPR. But I was there to write because I wanted to write a novel about the war, which is the book that I have out called The Good Lieutenant. It was about a female soldier in Iraq, and also partly told from Iraqi's point of view. But to write that book, I was obviously going to have to go there and report, and I was really scared to go. In Iraq, I don't know if you know this, like over 150 journalists were killed, which is more than in any other war. That includes a lot of Iraqi journalists because they worked with the Western organizations and then were killed or threatened by militias there, including some friends of mine. And in the area that I was going to go, which was west of Baghdad, in the summer of 2006, a CBS camera crew had stepped out of their Humvee to do a shot by the side of the road, and they were standing on top of a roadside bomb that went off right under them while they were doing that. It happened just a few days before I went there. I don't think the reporter was killed, but her crew was killed. And I did not want to die. And I had a son who was very young, and I had arranged to write this book before he was born, and it changed the way that I thought about dying. And I felt very embarrassed to risk my life to write a story, or for an egotistical reason like publishing a book. Now, I had real reasons other than egotistical ones. I was opposed to the war. I think that when people write about war and conflict, you try to teach people not to have them, and that's something worth doing. But I wasn't sure that I was the right person to do it, or that I really should have been there, or that my son would have been happy, like if I got blown up by an IED, to find out that I'd been trying to stop war. He would have wanted me to be around instead. And there was a case where reporting on a book or trying to write a book caused the trauma rather than the writing of the book being a thing that released or fixed the trauma. I will tell you that, and we can talk about it, I will tell you that it gave me a lot of sympathy for the soldiers that I was reporting on. Even though I was very opposed to the war, you also had to recognize, like, those men and women were experiencing what I went through, but they were doing it for a year, right? And they were all leaving children and thinking, oh, I don't know what it's going to be like. What if I don't see them again? And many of them had that, many of them didn't. The battalion that I was with lost 19 soldiers during the 3 months that I was there, almost all through IEDs. And those people will never see their children again, and those children will grow up without those parents. And so coming face to face with that element of risk was very difficult to process. I think it's very difficult for our soldiers to process. I don't know, there's a lot of writing workshops for veterans. I teach those sometimes. I think sometimes that can be helpful. I'm not sure that it always is. But I think that's why I'm on the panel. And the panic attacks and difficulty that I had writing the book afterward were mostly helped by talking to soldiers from the units that I embedded with who had the same things and would talk to me about them, and I could talk to them about what I felt. That was very helpful. I think the thing that is useful for us as civilians, recognizing soldiers who are coming back who've been through this process, is not to just say, hey, thank you for your service and ignore them, but try to learn something about what we have asked our soldiers to go through during what amounts to an almost ongoing war in Afghanistan and Iraq since 2001, in essence. So I would encourage you to read and watch films about these wars, even if they might be upsetting to you. So.
That's great. Thank you. All for these opening remarks. I just want to say that you've done exactly what I think we expected maybe and hoped you would do, which is complicate this issue a great deal and make clear that it's not as simple as writing through something traumatic and coming out recovered. That's not necessarily the way things actually work. But what you also did, I think, is each one of you made clear that you have had intensely personal experiences and then in one way or another have either chosen to or attempted to make those universal. And because you're all writers, that also includes publication or production, and in a way that it becomes available to an audience or readership. So I'm interested in hearing about how you approach the challenge of this incredible complication of dealing with these traumatic events, or how you struggle with that, because I'd like to hear more about the ways in which it's not always successful or easy. And also what it's like creatively to be having to turn these incredibly personal experiences into a narrative with characters and plot, and especially later in the process when now you're editing either your own self or your own voice almost as a character and your own experiences and shaping them for something that will go out into the world, and how you can navigate the challenge of these intense personal experiences and turning them into art rather than something that's confessional or something like that. Does that make sense? Yeah,
it does. Okay, thank you. The process that you refer to is really very, very difficult when you live in a small society, in what sociologists call a face-to-face society, which is where I live. Like, Niamey is a city, it's a capital of Niger, which is a huge country in terms of surface area, but it is also a very close-knit society where everybody knows everybody, and where everybody in the city knows me. So knows my family, knows my in-laws, I have like thousands of students who have gone through my hands. My husband has had thousands of students who have gone through his hands. I'm still at the university. Well, so you're writing something that is intensely personal and putting it out into a space where everybody talks about everybody, even things that they don't even know anyway. And where...
Sounds a lot like Kansas City.
And where nothing is seen to be literary, where everything is seen to be literal, and where some things are not to be said. And you're in a moment of pain. Let's say when my daughter Karima died, she was 16, and her death was like deeply related to the country and its health issues and its deficiency and its underdevelopment and its economic crises. And I wasn't born there. I didn't grow up there. I came from another space. I chose to be there, and I was there, and now my child is dead. Well, she almost died when she was getting born in the beginning, and it's just been a very difficult 16 years because she lived with a very difficult heart condition that couldn't be treated in the country, and so we didn't expect her to die. We had organized evacuation to Paris for a second surgery, and so she dies, and I am destroyed, and I am alone, and there's no other Jamaican in this vast country, and I have no family except my husband's family, and I am in pain, and my husband cannot talk about this, and people in Niger don't talk about what hurts, and you don't talk about things, and I'm going to die, so I have to do something to save myself, so I write. And I don't think of publication, I just think of releasing the knot, of shedding the tears I can't shed, because you don't cry when somebody dies in Niger. It prevents the soul of that person from going to Allah. And okay, I'm not Muslim, but all of my family is, and my daughter who died was too. I don't want to prevent her soul from going to Allah or anything. And so you write, and writing that had to do with going back into the past and saying to myself, but how did I get here? Why am I here? Do I want to stay here? And then it means remembering, how I got to be married to this man, how I fell in love with him, how I came to this country, how I have struggled to be a part of this place that is so totally different from anything I was educated to deal with, and which is so demanding, and to which I have recently been saying, well, hell, these people, I've been putting up with them for 15 years. It's about time that they learn to put up with me. And then this happens, right? And I go back and I touch very personal things. You're not supposed to talk about sex. You're not supposed to fantasize. You're not supposed to expose desire. And I go back to all of these things, and I write them, and my daughters read them. My daughters are big young women, and they said to me, it's not just about that, it's all about the country and my hopes and dreams for the country and the struggle and the pain, but also I come out into the light at the end, fortunately, not just in writing, but in reality. And my daughters said to me, Maman, this is beautiful, but are you going to publish it? Isn't Papa going to say that he brought you here to suffer? And anyway, I publish it, and there have been some very strange reactions. One is a total blackout of silence from my in-laws. And the only one who said anything when I asked him, and he's a colleague, he's a scholar, he is a little brother, and he said to me, but that book is a pamphlet. So it's not an easy thing, and my only thing was to say at least my husband and my daughters supported me and understood that this was my telling and my story, and that I had a right to do this, but they had to, my husband in particular had to face lots of stuff from colleagues abroad all over, oh, you poor man. Oh, now I know everything about you. Oh my goodness, she's really, dished you dirt. And he would say, but did you notice the title? autofiction. Did you see that there is fiction in autofiction? But people don't really, people who know us don't really care. They just like the story. Now we know everything about you.
Yeah.
It's not so easy.
I think, yeah, so if anyone else has thoughts on that, and also kind of touching on what you're saying, which is people who read your work and assume they know you as a person, or assume that everything is exactly autobiographical or something like that. So if anybody wants to respond to any of this.
Well, I think there's a couple of concerns, as Antoinette reminded me. When I was at the workshop, I studied with Jim McPherson, and Jim was fond of saying that the blues is all about turning pain into poetry, and I think that's a marvelous insight, and I think maybe that was behind my notion to write about my aunt, that I would somehow synthesize all this pain and turn it into something more. I discovered that there are several things at work when you retell a story. One is you have to synthesize it so as you know what's important and what isn't. You have to select how things begin and how they end, which hopefully is a very different thing. It starts in pain and ends in something else. But there's also a hidden agenda, which is oftentimes, I think, to, if not make yourself look good, at least explain yourself in such a way as you can shed some of this weight. And what it opens up is a process that I actually discovered even more writing historical biography, and that is how something is changed by writing about it. And especially if you write and revise, eventually it's going to become beautiful. And at some point it's going to be different than the thing that gave rise to it. So what people do, and especially historians when they write about events, is they lend their own intelligence to the event, to the description, to the principle of the thing, and as a consequence, it distorts. So eventually, all of this, if you look at the Renaissance, all of this collective intelligence is almost like varnish on a painting. It is built up to the point where it distorts. So the difficult thing, always in fiction or memoir, is telling the truth, but even more difficult is ascertaining the truth. You think you know it, but it'll bite you on the neck when it makes an appearance. It is not what you think it is.
Yeah. Oh, Whitney, since you also wrote about something relatively similar to this, I mean, it's not historical, it's current. But
it's going to be history.
It's going to be. But can you talk about if that was your experience as well, in terms of it being distorted by the writing about it?
Well, interestingly enough, to get the effect that I wanted to in that book, I ended up, and to make the book work, I ended up having to tell the story backwards, so that the story is actually told in reverse chronological order. It starts with a very bad IED attack, and then each chapter goes backward in time away from that attack, explaining how that happened. And I was grappling with certain structural issues that are true in war novels, where most war novels have an imposed narrative that I don't like, which is that you have training, deployment, combat, and denouement, right? And so then the combat part of most war stories is the part where the character reaches their sort of height of action, right? They prove themselves, or you become a man, right? In male myth of war fiction. My novel was about a woman, so that obviously doesn't apply to her, and I don't think it applies to anyone. And combat wasn't a place where I noticed people moving into becoming manhood, right? Combat is a destructive, traumatic thing that breaks people down and hurts them, right? So how do you write, why do we keep writing these stories in which the combat part, Star Wars is that way, right? We have this entrenched myth that combat is somehow good for you. And I wanted to escape that. So by structuring the book backward, I was able to escape it. That was very satisfying to me. And it was one of the reasons that I had so much trouble with the book and was so frightened of it, because I didn't know how to escape that narrative. And then once I did, all of my fears about the book went away, and that was really helpful.
Do you want to talk, Javier, about having such a personal experience and turning it into a beautiful play?
The thing about what happened with this play actually is that we did it in we decided we were going to do it in apartments, in people's houses. And when the actresses said, like, why do you want to, like, stage this play, like, and be in it? Because I wanted to be in it, to the director of it, not just the playwright. And second of all, why in people's houses? And I said, because I want it to be as intimate and as it gets. And I want people to actually be addressed during the play, and I want them to feel what I felt, and I want them to then recover. Like, I wanted like the whole process. And many times the actresses asked, but is it gonna be therapy theater or drama? You know, there's this like, and I said like, I don't know what it's gonna be. I'm very afraid, as you are, but let's try to do this. And then I remember when the play ended, every time of the 107 representations, there was this silence every time, not the clapping, but there was like this shocking silence in which even me, the director, the audience, that we would just like sit there for a minute or sometimes even more and then clap, and then like the audience members couldn't even, we were in the same living room, it wasn't a stage, it was like people could talk to us and they didn't know how to approach us, and they would come and say a lot of things, but every time there was someone that came and said, thank you, because I've never talked about this, but I had a sexual experience, aggressive sexual experience, and I've never actually spoken to anyone because I feared a lot being judged, and this experience was horrible. What we just they never said it was beautiful, or like they always said like it was very traumatic. But I think you just brought me some peace in my life. And one time even, and this was very powerful, I received a call from a guy in another state, and I was like, there was like lots of numbers, and it was not the regular area code. So I was like, maybe it's some phishing thing, I don't know. I just took it, and this guy says, "Can I meet you?" And I was like, "Hello, what's your name?" He's like, I don't remember your name," he said, "but I need to talk to you." And I was like, "Okay." He said, "I'm in Mexico City now. I drove 4 hours to see you. Are you available?" And I said, "Well, not now, but maybe in a couple of hours." He said, "I saw your play in that state, and I was going to therapy about something that happened to me like that. And after he finally cured or healed himself, the last thing his therapist asked was, you need to go and talk to this person, because actually you hadn't made much progress until you told me about going to this play. So the last thing you need to do is go and tell him that." So he talked for like 3 hours, and I remember he was scratching the chair while he was talking to me. And he asked, "How can you relive this situation every week?" Like he said, "I could not go through that one more time, and you have to see that happening in front of your eyes and see yourself be like taken to because with a play or with a book, maybe you write it, you publish it, and then you might not go back to it again. But with the play, I had to sit there and see it happening. Not just recreating the story, like he said, when you're writing it, you have to recreate it, to select, to choose what's good, what's not, what's going to help it happen. But then to see it again and again, you have to relive it. And empathy, and actually, when you're watching a play, you are thinking that you're the character. That's how plays work. You have to empathize. So it happened to me. And I said, well, I think playwriting or theater has a lot to do with the Prometheus myth, where every night this eagle disembowels him just so that organs can be redone again, so that the eagle can disembowel him every night. And why we do this, I couldn't possibly know, but I think so that others can. I think there's a sense of maybe this will continue to hurt me, but it will bring some good, like he was saying about the war. Like maybe it's not, there are egotistical reasons. I want to be respected, I want to be known as an interesting playwright, all of this, of course. I want to have a successful production, but there is also the way I want to prevent this from happening to someone else. Because males are always the aggressor in any raping situation. And if a woman says rapist, now in this in this country or in any country right now, and if you're a white male, and it's really easy that no one will actually think that you might be the victim of that story. And you can't imagine how many male persons said, I've been in domestic abuse and I've never actually, because my male friends, I cannot tell them this. And the woman, they were gonna look at me like, no, you're the aggressor, so don't try to turn this around. And also lots of women came and said, I just realized I maybe might have harmed someone. Or like, it was a very powerful experience, I think, for everyone. And maybe that's what actually brought me some peace. Not actually writing, but seeing that maybe it might brought peace to someone else and prevented further cases so that giving tools to people to cope with these situations. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that was very important to me.
I'm not as altruistic as Xavier, and I really didn't think of writing to help other people or helping other people to give voice or to have some sense of resolution to what they felt. In fact, he quotes Hemingway as talking about writing as bleeding over the typewriter. I know I cried over my computer a lot. And tears are not good for computers at all. Writing for me was a painful experience, but not just a painful experience, because as soon as I managed, it was painful when I was writing it, but like I remember writing about my daughter's death and then getting up. I couldn't see anyway, you're crying and you can't see anything. And getting up and going across the street to my neighbor, Halima, who had lost 2 children, and I meant to ask her, but how do you live after that? How does a mother survive her children? Of course, I didn't ask her anything so stupid, I just went over and we talked about work and what I was doing, and I was working, and I was busy, and then I mentioned that I was writing about it, and once or twice she came over and I read her pieces, and she said to me, "You are so brave, Mm-hmm. How can you do this? You are so brave. I wouldn't even know how to start touching this. I can't." And she gave me the strength to do it because I knew she was brave too, because she was alive, And my experience was that after I'd written a piece that was painful, when I got back to it, it wasn't as painful as it was when I was writing it. And it is also that the trauma of our lives is mixed in with all of the other things of our lives, the beauty of our lives, the challenges of our lives, the loves of our lives, the strivings. It's not just trauma. It's a painful spot in a whole life that is full of meaning and ambitions and strivings and lovings. And I have found that, like, writing On m'appelle Nina actually helped me to stay in Niger, actually made me understand how much I love this country, actually helped me to process that love is not an easy thing. It is not just made of bubbles and beauty. It's also made of struggles and challenges and refusals, and you're up in my face, I'm up in your face too, but I hate you, I love you, although I sometimes hate you, and I'm not going anywhere, So I have noted that when people who have read this book and said to me, from all different experiences, like a girlfriend who lives in Bordeaux, married to a middle-class white French man, and she herself is very middle-class. She always was. She was middle-class in Jamaica, so it's not like she's gone up in the world or anything. She reads my book and she says, "Nina is me." Huh. And then she tells me all about how difficult it is to leave home and live in another society. She says, people are very clannish over here too, Or a French man who's lived in Niger, who says to me, "You're not Nina. Nina is beyond you, You gave yourself to this story, but then the story is larger than you." Or the journalist who interviewed me for a TV show in Paris, who afterwards goes out and says, "Give me a minute," and she comes back and she said, "I had to go and fix my makeup because your book made me cry. I lost my father 3 years ago and I still haven't gotten over it. How could you write this?" So I think our stories are larger than ourselves, and I think that is how, for me, I get to a larger dimension, because people give back to me. Not everybody, of course, you know. And I listened to Xavier, and I realized that maybe this overwhelming silence I'm getting from my in-laws is not necessarily negative. Maybe they're processing things that they've never had a chance to put words on. And I also note that women in Niger who have read my book and who are born and grew up there and were bred to live in that society have said to me, some of them, I am Nina, or somebody had to write that book from the inside.
We only have a few minutes left, and I want to have at least some chance for questions. But Melissa, I want to give you a chance to say something more if you want to.
I just wanted to say that I think something that we're all kind of touching on is the way these experiences, when we share them, they change. The experience itself changes, not just to the person who is speaking of this moment of pain, but also to the person that's witnessing it. And I think about that in the classroom a lot with my students, and how oftentimes when they do share moments of insecurity and abuse and heartbreak, those moments tend to kind of loosen their grip on the person that's sharing it. It becomes something that everyone in that classroom space is able to partake in.
On that note, does anyone have questions or want to share anything with this panel? And if you do, could you please address them into the microphone at the back?
I'll try to make this as quick as possible. This is a direct question for Mike Lankford and an indirect question for the rest of the panelists, and I have to phrase it directly for Mike first. First of all, I'm very glad you talked about you writing that particular book as a failure. Mm-hmm. I am probably one of the few people in America who read that book in manuscript, and I hated it. Yeah. Not only that, but I read it twice. You sent me another version, and I hated it more. Mm-hmm. And here's what the problem was, and I'm glad
That's what your fans always do, Mike, at events.
I hate you, but I'm here to talk to you. I want to say this because I've also finished Mike's new book about Leonardo da Vinci, and it's absolutely brilliant. It is a stunning book, but we'll hopefully have time to talk about that later. So here is sort of my response to your first book, and at least to this question. I didn't like you in your book, in the book about your aunt. I didn't like you the first time or the second time. There was something lost in you trying to write about yourself in that experience, and it changed the language that you use. The language you use there is different than your first book or this new book. And so I think it's extremely important to recognize failure when it confronts you, and I hope you burn that manuscript. But that being said, the new book is like I said, for those who have not seen it, read it, heard about it, it's a stunning book. Go buy it. Now, trauma in writing. You wrote about Da Vinci. Can you sort of say, as for an artist, that trauma was essential to his life? How did it affect his life, and was it reflected in his work? And the variation of that question for the other panelists is, do you know writers or artists whose own traumatic life you think changed the way they created their art, and how was that trauma reflected in, it doesn't have to be writing, it could be painting or any other form? Thank you.
That's a good-sized question, Larry. Thank you. I would say first off, it's informative that you didn't like the book because of the language. I thought you didn't like the book because there were all those colonics in there, and that because there was that you have a shit phobia. That
there was that too. Yeah.
As far as Leonardo's concerned, trauma had a gigantic effect both on his life and his art, because he hooked up with Cesare Borgia for 9 months, and during that time there were at least 8 massacres. These are medieval Renaissance massacres at short range with swords, and as a consequence, he clearly suffered what we would call post-traumatic stress disorder, and as a consequence became the Leonardo we know. He stopped cutting his hair, he became a vegetarian, he radically changed his life, and he changed the art the subject of his art. He was commissioned immediately after that when he left Borgia. He went back to Florence, commissioned by Machiavelli, as it happens, to paint the Battle of Algahari, which, if you've ever seen Leonardo's or a sketch of it or the copies, he was not able to finish because it is absolutely that moment of total ferocity, where not only are these men on horseback fighting, but the horses are biting each other. It's pure insanity. And as a consequence, he was not able to finish it. He had that little painting at home that he kept going back to, the Mona Lisa. That he would travel to work on. But the Battle of Algahari was just across the square, and he walked around it for months and months, and then finally escaped to Milan. So it clearly had an effect. The interesting thing is that we live in a post-Freudian age, so we have language to talk about these things. He did not. And that's one of the gigantic differences between the Renaissance and now, is we have an interior space opened up not just by our ability to read and interiorize events, but we have a language for it, which amplifies things tremendously.
I mean, we really are more or less out of time, but do you have one last question you can at least present to the panel, and we can briefly answer it or think about it?
My question sort of comes off of Larry's question having to do with voice that you use within the story dealing with trauma, because I know for myself, each different trauma that I've presented on paper, I've had to find a different way to distance myself from it and a different tool to connect with it. And so I'm always looking for more means to do that. For me, my latest book, I had to use find the humor in each traumatic event in order to put it on paper. And so if each one of you could kind of address how in your current project or in other projects you've found that proper distance to write about it.
Well, I almost never write about myself. And I think that depends on you as a person. I mean, Antoinette, you're obviously a very personal writer, but that just doesn't work for me. And so I'm always looking for someone who's at an oblique angle to what I feel or am experiencing. And in this case, Emma Fowler, the lieutenant, who's the good lieutenant in the novel, was a perfect example of somebody who's outside of a power structure, who, because she's a woman in a totally male-dominated profession, right, has a special story, an individual story to tell. And I also felt like, I mean, can anyone here name a single woman who fought in Iraq or Afghanistan? Who?
Tammy Duckworth.
Tammy Duckworth is a very good example. She was just elected to the Senate, but most people don't know, right? Because none of our stories are about them. So it helped me knowing that these women who I worked with really closely wanted that narrative to be told to other people, and it was meaningful to them to have it told, to see themselves represented and what they went through, which is very peculiar and different from what men went through. Getting that story into the world was super helpful for me in my own private reporter stuff, but I didn't write a novel about a reporter being upset about going to war. That would have been a terrible novel. Right? But being able to talk about these women who were separate from me, offset from my experience, but I thought were really important and had a unique story, that was super helpful for me.
And I would just like to add about how do you do it. First, I wrote the first version of the play in which I wanted her to die at the end and to get AIDS, and because I wanted, like, the first version I wanted to punish this, like, just to cleanse and whatever. And the name Eliza came because in Spanish the AIDS test is called Elisa.
In French as well.
So I was like, this is what I'm gonna do, and it never worked. It was like a terrible play. And then I said, no, I have to save her one more time. This is how it will work. So I tried to write the play about, like, with her as the central character and trying to humanize her and trying to find the reasons and the motives. Why did she do it? What was she trying to also say? And when I finally thought that I had understood her motives and actually felt compassion for her and actually wanted to hug her one more time, then the play worked beautifully, because it was not about it was not about me anymore. It was about a human being that is also suffering, and he's not a bad person. It's like, and if you try to write about pain, thinking like there's like an evil God trying to, like, why did this happen to me? Of course it's gonna be terrible, because you're just like lashing, and no one wants to come and see that. That's just like if I start to cry in the street, no one's gonna like come and, oh, this is beautiful, But if I try to take out myself from it and just leave the raw pain, and actually trying to take the word pain and trying to just the human experience of it, I think that's when you actually touch something that might work for everyone, not just for you.
I think fiction, short fiction, does it, because then you take the materials of your obsessions, your questions, and then you turn them into characters. And that's what I've tried to do in this collection of short stories, very traumatically titled Tina Shot Me Between the Eyes and Other Stories. So I look at, I look at relationships, I look at families, I look at couples, I look at stifling, constraining face-to-face societies, whether they're small towns like Niamey or prayer groups like the Catholic Charismatic Renewal, which is a part of my history, but which I can use in another context, even though it's not necessarily reality. So I think storytelling, fiction, novel, and so on are ways in which humor, of course, because then it no longer has to be you. And so that is one way of doing it. I think another way of doing it is maybe giving your obsessions to a character that is totally unlike you, that has nothing to do with you, gender, age, nationality, religion, and then working through how that person lives and feels, and maybe somebody that you would normally hate in life, and then learn to create that character with feeling and sympathy, even if you don't agree. So these are some of the ways I think that writers work through things that are not necessarily easy and that they at sometimes might have considered traumatic.
Okay, thank you all for your contributions and discussion today. Thank you all.